All right, this is Obaid on behalf of V Electronics, and in this video, we'll be talking about specialization and gains in terms of monetary, value. All right, so when it comes to specialization, we've talked about comparative advantage. So your specialization has to do with taking advantage of that comparative advantage or absolute advantage. All right, so specialization. Okay, we mentioned how the global demand is based on comparative advantage. If you do have a comparative advantage in producing a product, however, you decide to produce a product that you don't have a comparative advantage in, okay, you will reduce total world supply, okay, total supply to all the countries in the world. This is if you import and export. All right, as a result of which there is a possibility that some countries in the world won't receive what they demand. Okay, if they're looking for oil, there might be a shortage of oil because one country is producing both oil and corn, as a result of which it is not able to supply a certain country in the world. Okay, and likewise, if there is a shortage of corn, if one country is not able to produce enough corn because it's producing both oil and corn, and obviously there are countries in the world that won't receive corn. Okay, so for that reason, we have something called specialization, and as the name suggests, it's sort of like specialization in an occupation, right? A doctor can't be an engineer can't be a doctor. Okay, as a result of which, if you specialize in something, okay, everybody profits. So specialization. Okay, this is where a country with a comparative advantage, a country or an economy, a market-based economy, a country with a comparative advantage, okay, specialize. Okay, this is specialize. This is specialize. Okay, in producing a certain product, in production of a certain product. So this is production of a certain product. Certain good or product. It could be commodity, it could be natural resources, it could be precious metals, so on and so forth. So good or product. Or it could be a finished product in general. Okay, and especially true when it comes to countries that specialize in labor. Okay, so if the labor is less expensive in a country, or if the labor is more efficient and more productive in a country, then obviously, okay, this country specializes in labor. Okay, as a result of which they may specialize in a certain finished product. All right, so apart from that, we go back to what we talked about in the past few videos. So we talked about corn and oil, and we said, hey, listen, if you have two countries, country A and you have country B, and they produce both corn and oil. So this is corn, this is oil. Oil will be in barrels. Okay, corn will be in bushels, so BU. Okay, same over here. This is country B. This is corn, and this is oil. All right, and if they decide to produce both oil and corn, okay, your graph will look something like this. So this is, say, for example, your production possibilities frontier with opportunity cost as you move away from the production of corn. Okay, you have your opportunity cost corn, okay, for producing oil. Okay, however, if you decide to produce both corn and oil, let's say this is your point C over here somewhere. Okay, you have 50% of corn production, for example, and 50% of oil production. Okay, so let's assume that this is 40 bushels over here, and this is 40 barrels over here. So this will be 20 bushels of corn and 20 barrels of oil. Okay, and likewise, okay, you have country B, which will do the same thing. Okay, you have half oil or a certain percentage of oil and a certain percentage of corn. Okay, now, if you consider trading, when these countries decide to trade, okay, it's possible that this country may end up trading, okay, let's say 10 bushels of corn for 20 bushels of oil. Okay, so it's going to trade in 10 bushels, which means it will give up 10 bushels. Okay, which means it will now have 10 bushels of corn. Okay, so it will have 10 bushels of corn. So this becomes all of a sudden, okay, this becomes 10 bushels of corn. So 10 bushels of corn. And because it's getting, um, okay, let's say 20 barrels of oil, it will now have 20 plus 20, 40 barrels of oil. Okay, so this is 40 barrels of oil. So 40 plus 10, this is a total of 50 units altogether. All right, and over here, country B decides to trade, and let's say they have, okay, 20 bushels of corn and 30 barrels of oil. Okay, which means they're good at producing oil more than they're good at producing corn. They have a comparative advantage in producing oil. Okay, so for that reason, if they decide to trade and if they decide to export oil, okay, if they decide to export oil, let's say 20 barrels of oil for 40 bushels of corn. So this will become 10 barrels of oil, and this will become 40 plus 20, which is 60 bushels of corn, as a result of which now this total here is 70 units. Okay, originally this total was 50 units. 10 plus 40, 50 is stayed at 50. Okay, this one over here, this was 30 plus 20, 50. It went up to 70 units. All right, so this is how the trade will impact your production possibilities frontier chart. Okay, however, if you specialize in producing either corn or oil, you're looking at a different graph altogether. Okay, when you specialize in something, so let's say you specialize in oil, okay, you have oil production over here. This is in barrels. And you decide to go 100% into oil rather than, producing corn because you will trade your oil for corn. Let's say this country over here decides to go 100% when it comes to production of oil. So as a result of which, the oil production in terms of barrels, this will be, okay, 100%, so 100 barrels. And your corn production, this will be, okay, zero, okay, 0 bushels of corn. So you're technically looking at a vertical line over here. Okay, so 0 bushels of corn. However, if they decide to trade, and let's say they decide to give up 50 barrels of oil for 100 bushels of corn. Okay, let's say this is 100 over here. Okay, all of a sudden you have 150 units. 150. Okay, so technically speaking, in terms of total number of units, okay, this country gained from the trade. Okay, however, this is not the only gain that we're going to talk about. There is another form of gain when it comes to trade, and that has to do with the price of goods, okay, or price of basket of goods, which means that if the country is exporting oil at a higher price than what the country is paying for imports. So let's talk about imports. We're talking about, well, corn over here rather than oil, and oil will be your export. Okay, so let's say country is exporting oil for corn, then obviously this country over here, okay, because it's exporting oil at a higher price than what it pays for corn for the same number of units. So let's say, um, in this case, we're talking about 50. Okay, so let's say 50 units or 50 barrels of oil for 50 bushels of corn. Because the oil is more expensive than corn and oil is being exported at a higher price than corn, this country be profits from trade. Okay, now likewise, as far as I understand, country A can profit from trade as well, despite the fact that country A is producing corn. Okay, however, for country A to profit from this trade, given the prices are the same for oil and corn, like over here, country A will need to produce more corn. Okay, so let's say country A has a lot of land and it produces, okay, rather than 100, it produces 200 bushels of corn. Okay, so 200 bushels of corn. And over here, it wants, okay, 100 barrels of oil. Right now, it has zero because it specializes in corn. So the specialization is in corn. The country can afford to give up 100 bushels of corn because the domestic demand for personal consumption, okay, domestic consumers, is 100 bushels, as a result of which this is access over here. So you have access, just like your access reserves in your bank, okay, or money in your savings account. This is sort of like your access. And this is what the country can afford to export, as a result of which the country goes ahead and exports 100 bushels of corn for 100 barrels of oil. Okay. Now, given the prices for corn, okay, despite the fact that oil might be more expensive than corn, for example, if, okay, the country goes ahead and exports, let's say, 150 bushels of corn, it's possible that the country might profit from the trade, right? Because it's importing 100 barrels of oil for 150 bushels of corn that it exports. Okay, and given the price, let's say this is, let's assume, theoretically speaking, let's say this is $2, okay, per bushel. Okay, and say your oil is $1 per barrel. Okay, which means that if the country exports 150 bushels, okay, it gains 150 times 2, which is 300 from this trade, and it loses, okay, $100. Because obviously this is not a barter form of arrangement. This is not bartering. You're not exchanging goods. You're actually buying and selling goods when it comes to trade. Okay, when you import and export, okay, this is in monetary value. Okay, which means you're not bartering, you're not exchanging products, but you are importing and exporting, which means you're buying from the other country and the other country is buying from you. As a result of which now You have $100 that you lose because of import, and $300 you gain because of export. Okay, which means your net profit over here, this is 300 take away 100, which is $200 per unit. Okay, so $200 or $200 in general, not per unit, but $200 altogether. Okay, so $200. We calculated the per unit price over here, which is $2 per bushel, and this is $1 per barrel, which means this is $200 in profit. All right, so this is how country A will profit from selling corn and importing oil. Okay, so apart from that, okay, this is how specialization and trade works. On behalf of V Electronics, this is Ubaid. Have yourself a great day.